Hey Star Trek fans, Dan Gunther here. Welcome to the final installment of the Picard Deep Dive. That is right. We are on Season 3, Episode 10, the series finale of Star Trek Picard, The Last Generation. This is my look at the Easter eggs and canon connections in this episode. There's quite a few, of course, given that this is wrapping up 35 years of the TNG cast. Let's take a look at what I was able to find in this episode. And of course, warning for spoilers. If you have not seen this final episode, I would highly suggest watching it before watching this video. Our first references of the episode come before the episode even starts. We get our usual Star Trek opening screen, the bit of branding that Paramount Plus has done for Star Trek over the past few seasons of new Star Trek. And in place of the Titan, which we've gotten all season, we have the Enterprise D, which is of course fitting, as that is now the hero ship for the show. Also gone is the usual music, the Star Trek fanfare that plays over this, and instead we get ominous music reminiscent of the Borg theme from First Contact, and the Star Trek logo itself appears to be somewhat Borgified with implants and lasers all over it. We also see, in place of Vadic's ship, the Shrike, a Borg cube hiding in the clouds. When we come back from the recap from previous episodes, we see this lovely shot of a nebula, which is lifted directly from the opening credits of Star Trek The Next Generation. And of course, we get gorgeous shots of the Enterprise D, commandeered by Picard and his crew to save the galaxy once again. We hear a planetary distress call sent by the President of the Federation, Anton Chekhov, played here in voice form by Walter Koenig, of course Pavel Chekhov from the original Star Trek series. Now the name Anton Chekhov would seem to be a tribute to the late Anton Yelchin, who played Chekhov in the Kelvin Timeline films, who sadly, tragically passed away at a very young age. There are several little Easter eggs throughout this planetary distress call as well. We get several phrases that are very reminiscent of the President's distress call in Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, "Do not approach Earth, save yourselves." And we also get a roundabout quote of Spock. President Chekhov says, "There are always possibilities," which is actually not a quote from Spock, but rather from Kirk in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, who himself was apparently quoting Spock when he said, as Spock is fond of saying, "There are always possibilities." President Anton Chekhov also references his father, not directly by name, but we of course know his father to be Pavel Chekhov. And finally, with regards to this distress call, we see that it is using codec Myriad, which of course came into play much earlier in this season when Beverly Crusher used this codec to contact Jean-Luc Picard. On the Titan, Seven, Raffi, and a group of older officers who retake the bridge use phasers that have the transporter system tied into it. Using this, they're able to shoot their fellow crew members, not killing them, but instead transporting them to the transporter room where they're locked inside. Seven makes the joke that they may have invented the portable beam-me-up, which would seem to tie in to the future transporters that we see in Star Trek Discovery in the 32nd century. But also, this is reminiscent of the weapons used by the mercenaries in the TNG two-parter Gambit. They apparently used this weapon on Jean-Luc Picard to make it look as though he was vaporized, but instead it activated their transporter system and beamed him aboard their ship. The newly almost human Data expresses a great deal of hatred for the Borg, and it really reminded me of one of the first times that he ever feels emotions in the first part of the two-part TNG episode Descent. While fighting the Borg, he experiences anger. We later find out that this was projected to him by Lore, but this was still very reminiscent of the hatred that he had when fighting Lore's Borg army in that episode. Picard, Riker, and Worf beam aboard the Borg cube to find it deserted, almost silent, with very few Borg drones, and what Borg drones are there seem to be being consumed to keep the Queen alive. It would seem that Janeway dealt them quite a blow in the Voyager finale Endgame, introducing the neuroleptic pathogen that nearly destroyed the Borg collective. We see Vox, who is of course the assimilated Jack Crusher, sporting implants and a costume very similar to the one worn by Locutus in The Best of Both Worlds. However, his hair is still perfect. We once again meet the Borg Queen, voiced by Alice Krige, who originated the role in Star Trek First Contact. However, she is physically played by another actor, and she looks horrific. I really love the production design that they did for her here. She looks like something out of Alien or another horrific film like that. And we can truly see why Jack considered shooting her in the last episode, quote, a mercy. Back on the Titan, they decide to take on the entire fleet using their ship. Thankfully, they remembered the trick from Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, using a prefix code to scramble the shields of other ships. As Seven orders the prefix codes to be sent and for the shields of the fleet to drop, we hear a similar sound effect to the shields of the Reliant dropping in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. As Picard confronts the Borg Queen, he uses a similar gambit to the one he tried in Star Trek First Contact, saying that the Queen should take him in place of Jack Crusher. In First Contact, it was in place of Data. However, as in First Contact, refuses, instead shunning Picard for her new acquisition, Vox. Also, like First Contact, we get a repeated line from the Borg Queen from that film as she tells Picard to watch his future's end. And no, she's not just saying to watch a 2-part episode of Star Trek Voyager, but rather the end of humanity. As Worf and Riker discover the location of the Borg beacon, a couple of drones come to life and begin attacking them. And these Borg seem to have hand cannons very similar to the ones that we saw in Descent. Up until now, that was the only time we saw Borg using weapons like this. There were some fans that made the comment that maybe taking the Enterprise D in the last episode wasn't the best choice, and instead they should have taken a smaller, more maneuverable ship designed to fight the Borg, like the Defiant. I disagreed at the time, of course, thinking that the Enterprise D was the perfect ship because that's the one they're familiar with, it's a great nostalgia trip, etc., etc. However, seeing Data flying the Enterprise D through the Borg cube actually made me think maybe the Defiant would be the best ship to use for this. Nevertheless, the sequence is terrific and wonderful to watch, and it further occurs to me that if they were going to use the Enterprise D for only the things that it has proven to be good at over the years, they would have to be hosting a trade conference or maybe transporting ambassadors from one planet to another or something. Not really skills that are going to come up during this mission. In an effort to save Jack, Picard plugs himself into the Borg Collective, joining the hive mind for the first time since he was rescued from the Collective in the Best of Both Worlds. As he does so, we see footage from Star Trek First Contact representing his time as Locutus. After destroying the beacon, the Enterprise attempts to rescue the away team that is still aboard the Borg cube. Riker says goodbye to Deanna in his mind, and Deanna hears him, taking the helm to rescue them at the very last possible second. Deanna taking the helm really reminded me of her taking the helm in Star Trek Generations, and I feel like even the camera shot as she rushes from her post to the helm station really echoed that move in Generations. I love that she takes the helm here and pilots the Enterprise so expertly. I feel like there are so many jokes made about her crashing the Enterprise, both in Generations and in Nemesis, that to see her doing this here really warmed my heart. And I really am tired of those jokes about Deanna Troi. Really, honestly, she saved everybody aboard the Enterprise by landing the saucer section. She did not crash the ship. She saved everyone. And here she gets to save her Imzadi and the away team, as well as Beverly and Picard's son. Way to go, Deanna. Love it. Also, for those of you who have done the Star Trek experience in Las Vegas, which sadly closed many years ago, did not the appearance of the Enterprise here above Picard, Worf, Riker, and Jack remind you of sequences during the shuttle escape in the Klingon encounter? I don't have footage to show you exactly what I mean, but for those of you who took that ride, I think you'll agree that this felt very familiar. The Enterprise is piloted out of the Borg cube as it explodes, and as almost everybody on the internet has already said, this is very reminiscent of the Millennium Falcon's escape from the Death Star 2 in Return of the Jedi. All that's missing is Lando's whoop of joy as the Enterprise escapes the exploding cube. This isn't so much an Easter egg as just a comment about how much I've loved Worf this season of Star Trek Picard, and in this episode he continues in top form. Just watch as he exits the turbolift during this scene. He seems genuinely disappointed that he did not die in battle. Or as we find out a few minutes later, maybe he's just exhausted as he falls asleep on the bridge. In the aftermath of the battle in Earth's orbit, we see the Titan and the Enterprise D flying together into the sunset, and this really reminded me of one of the ending shots of Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, as the Enterprise A and the Excelsior similarly fly together over Khitomer. In this episode, we get a true 7 of 9 and Tuvok reunion as we discover that the changelings did not kill many of the people they replaced, but instead kept them as a source of information. Tim Russ is here as Captain Tuvok rather than his changeling doppelganger, as we saw a few episodes ago. During this scene, we see 7 of 9's crew evaluation by Shaw, referencing once again another item from the closing credits of Star Trek Picard, notably this shot where we see the crew evaluation by Shaw of a redacted crew member, redacted of course because of the name confusion between Annika Hansen and 7 of 9. This scene sees 7 promoted to captain. Now, we've learned after the fact, the showrunner, Terry Matalas, really wanted Kate Mulgrew to guest star in this episode, and it's my opinion, this is just a guess, that she was supposed to be in this scene, and she is the one that informs 7 of her promotion to captain. The scene still works wonderfully with Tim Russ as Tuvok, but I do sadly regret that we did not get to see Admiral Janeway, especially after she was name-dropped so many times throughout the course of the season. We get a truly lovely scene between Worf and Raffi here, and we learn that Worf has sent Raffi's records to her family to demonstrate to them what a true hero she is, which goes a long way, of course, to mending fences between Raffi and the rest of her family, including allowing her to finally meet her granddaughter. We get a lovely line by Worf in this scene where he says that tears are the body's weapon against pain, but having never wept himself, he wouldn't know. This is a nice reference to Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, where Spock says that Klingons have no tear ducts. Referenced in this scene is Worf's adopted family, the House of Martok. General Martok, of course, took Worf in as a brother in the Deep Space Nine Season 5 episode, Soldiers of the Empire. We see a counseling session with the newly human-ish Data and Counselor Troy. He mentions weeping over seeing an ensign feeding his cat, and this reminded me of his tears of joy at finding Spot alive at the end of Star Trek Generations. I really love this exploration of Data's new nature as basically a human at this point, noting that being human is just as difficult as striving to be human. And I really look forward to further exploration of Data. I don't expect that that will be in television or film, although I would be very happy to be proven wrong. However, novels or even a comic series about Data's journey from this point forward would be such a joy to read. We see Deanna Troi going through several vacation choices. We have Vulcan, Andoria, Bajor, and Trill. We also have several locations on Earth such as Kauai, Malibu, and Orlando. Other references include Omicron Ceti 3. This is the planet from the TOS episode This Side of Paradise, the one with the spores that protected everybody from the Berthold rays, which hopefully they've found another solution to in the 25th century. We have Zadar 4, which was mentioned in the TNG Season 1 episode When the Bow Breaks as home to a species of dolphin. And we have Kafar Prime, which was mentioned in earlier episodes of Season 3 of Picard. The Ilios fled there after being attacked by Fenris Rangers, according to Jack Crusher. As Data is leaving his counseling session, he calls William Riker Commander, which is an interesting quirk of Data in that he seems a little bit stuck in previous people's roles. He's repeatedly called Picard Captain, even though he holds the rank of Admiral, and Riker, of course, holding the rank of Captain, is still called Commander by him here. 1 year later, we find that the Enterprise D is now at the Fleet Museum, taking up the berth that was inhabited by the Titan. It was the empty one when the Titan arrived there several episodes ago. This lovely goodbye on the bridge was wonderful to watch, and even Riker's comment about missing that voice when we hear Majel Barrett's computer voice as the Enterprise is being shut down. Picard tells Geordi to take good care of her, and as they leave the bridge, we hear some familiar music. This is very similar to the music at the end of Star Trek Generations, as the 3 starships left orbit of Viridian 3, warping away with the survivors of the Enterprise D. So we are once again saying goodbye to the Enterprise D, but in a very different situation this time. We also see that after 1 year, Space Dock has been rebuilt. They did some really fast work on that. And apparently we have some new comm badges. The familiar Star Trek Picard comm badges are altered in that the field behind the silver delta part is now gold as opposed to the metallic gray. We saw Admiral Crusher wearing one in an earlier scene. However, it is best viewed here on the uniform of the newly commissioned Ensign Jack Crusher. We find out that the Titan A has now been rechristened as the USS Enterprise NCC-1701G. We of course learned earlier in the season that the Enterprise F was being decommissioned as part of the Frontier Day celebrations, so we get the next iteration of the Enterprise as the hero ship we've followed for the course of this season, and it will carry on the tradition of Enterprise, with 7 of 9 as captain, Raffi Musiker as first officer, and crew from the Titan, helmsman Sidney LaForge, Lieutenant Mira, Lieutenant Esmar, and of course Jack Crusher as special counselor to the captain. The only person sadly missing is Tavine. I really wish she had survived to be a part of this crew. And of course, at the end of this scene, we are left with one question. What is Seven's go-to-warp catchphrase? Leave your ideas in the comments below. We get a final scene with all of our heroes at the 10 Forward bar, which we have seen several times throughout the season, mostly in hologram form. Guinan is apparently here, but just off camera, unfortunately. We get several references in this scene, one to prune juice, which is of course Worf's favorite drink that Guinan introduced him to in the TNG Season 3 episode Yesterday's Enterprise. Worf claims that he has a seminar on Mugatu meditation in the morning. Mugatus are the ape-like creatures first seen in the TOS episode A Private Little War, and most recently seen in the Lower Decks episode Mugatu Gamatu. Data attempts to tell the same limerick that he was repeating in the second TNG episode The Naked Now. There once was a lady from Venus whose body was shaped like a, at which point in that episode he was cut off, and unfortunately he does not get to finish it here as well, much to his consternation. Jean-Luc Picard gives the final toast of the evening, quoting the "There is a tide" monologue from Julius Caesar. This continues the tradition of Picard's love of Shakespeare, and "There is a Tide" was also the title of a recent Star Trek Discovery episode in Season 3. The idea behind the monologue is that the key to success in life is in learning that a tide, the motivation of men, is the guiding force in our lives, and it is up to us to recognize and seize the opportunities that are given to us. The scene ends with a game of poker, which we see over the closing credits. This, of course, is an homage to the end of the TNG series, the episode All Good Things, which also ended in a poker game. However, in that scene, the camera goes up and out through the roof of Riker's quarters, out and watching the Enterprise flying away into the sunset. This camera move at this time mirrored how I was feeling, which was that I did not want to leave these heroes. I did not want the game to end, as Picard says in the first episode of Star Trek Picard. And the camera stays with the group through the entire credits, and at the end goes back in for the title Star Trek Picard. This also struck me as vaguely symbolic of Picard and his Knights of the Round Table. Now we do get a mid-credits scene here set back aboard the Enterprise G. I almost said Titan, but no, this is the Enterprise. We have Jack unpacking, and we see him display a model of the Enterprise D. It seems that, of course, now that the Enterprise D has once again saved civilization as we know it, people love the fat one once again. We also get a picture of Gates McFadden and Patrick Stewart at a premiere. I've seen this photo floating around for many years, and I love that it's used here as Picard and Crusher in their younger years. And we get a surprise visitor. John Delancey reprises his role as Q, visiting the offspring of Jean-Luc Picard. I love Q's line when Jack mentions that he had died, and Q says that he was hoping the next generation wouldn't think so linearly. I really like this because it's always been my assertion that in season 2 of Picard, Q wasn't just suddenly dying at that time. Remember, time and space has no meaning to the Q, so he can appear anytime, any place. It's possible that Q lived for billions of years more after we last saw him in Voyager or Lower Decks, but for whatever reason, he came back to this time to see Picard at the end of his life. So I love that we're seeing Q here. It could be at any point in his life, and he in fact looks more vibrant and more alive here than he did at any point during Picard season 2. I know a lot of people were hoping that it was Wesley Crusher that would appear to Jack here at the end of the series, but I really like the decision to involve Q, given that he was there at the beginning of The Next Generation, and he is here once again at the end to tell Jack Crusher that his trial never ends. Well, that was a lovely note to end this season on and this series on. All of these characters, both old and new, I've really enjoyed the time spent with them. What did you think of Picard Season 3? I think it's definitely going to go down as some of the best of the new Star Trek, which is saying something because I have liked a lot of what we've gotten in the last few years. But this really was something special. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And of course, if there are any Easter eggs that I missed, please let me know in the comments below. All that's left is to thank my viewers for watching and to thank the Patreon supporters for all of their help in bringing these episodes to you. I could not do it without you. Thank you so very much. Well, that's it, like I said, for Picard. But that is not an end to Star Trek by any means. We have Season 2 of Strange New Worlds coming in about a month and a half. Really looking forward to that. We're going to be doing these deep dive episodes for each episode of Strange New Worlds as well as other Star Trek shows that come out beyond that. So thank you once again so much for watching. I'll see you again very soon. Until then, as always, live long and prosper.